By the time I saw the shiny new padlock hanging off my pasture gate, I knew the folks down in the subdivision had gone from annoying to dangerous. It wasn't an old farm lock, either. It was one of those bright brass ones, brand name stamped across the front like it was proud of itself, with a plastic tag wired to the hinge that read, in bold black letters, HOA access only, do not remove. Behind the gate, my cattle were bunched up along the fence, noses pushing at the metal, lowing in that impatient way that means, "Hey, human, you're late." Beyond them, the dust trail from their morning walk still hung in the air, stretching toward the far side of the pasture where the troughs sat in a long row, filled by a pipe that ran straight from the only well for miles. My well. I stepped up to the gate and wrapped my fingers around the cold metal, feeling the vibration when one of the calves bumped it from the other side. The chain they'd threaded through my gate was new, too. Too clean, too shiny, like it had just come off a hardware store shelf and hadn't yet learned whose land it was sitting on. A white sign was zip-tied to the top rail, flapping a little in the breeze. HOA Well Access Road, it said. No unauthorized livestock past this point. Unauthorized livestock. That one made me smile. I heard tires crunch on gravel behind me and turned to see a white SUV pulling up, logo for Whispering Creek Estates on the door. The driver's window slid down with a soft electric hum, and out popped a carefully made-up face wearing sunglasses too big for the situation. "Mr. Walker," she called, "we've been trying to reach you." "I've noticed. You're branching out from letters to chains now." She gave a tight laugh like she hadn't prepared for humor. "We had no choice. The board voted to secure this gate. This road is the only access to our community well, and having cattle crossing near it is a liability. You'll still be able to use other parts of your property, of course, but this gate is now for HOA access only." I looked from her to the lock to the thirsty cattle staring at the troughs they couldn't reach. "You sure you want to say that out loud? That this gate, to the only well in this valley, is for HOA access only?" "That's correct," she said, chin lifting. "It's a community resource." I leaned on the gate and let my voice go quiet. "Ma'am," I said, "you might want to check whose name is on the land under that community resource. Because here's something your board should have learned before it touched my gate. That well you're all so proud of is actually on my land." Her smile faltered. For the first time she actually looked past the gate, past the cattle, out across the pasture and toward the squat metal wellhead glinting in the distance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why I was standing at my own gate arguing with people who thought they owned my water, we have to go back a bit. To when all this started with some glossy brochures, a thirsty developer, and a deal that made a whole neighborhood forget who really kept the taps running. I've lived in this valley most of my life. My grandfather came here with nothing but an old flatbed truck, a borrowed drill rig, and a wild idea that there had to be water under all this rock somewhere. Back then, nobody wanted this place. Too dry, they said. Too far from town. The creek that cut along the bottom of the valley went nearly dry most summers, leaving cracked mud and a few stubborn pools that smelled like old leaves and fish. The hills were covered in scrub and rock, the kind of place even coyotes didn't seem fond of. But my grandfather saw something else. He saw the way certain grasses stayed just a little greener along a particular slope. He noticed where the snow melted slower in spring, where the soil felt cooler under his boots. He talked to old-timers who remembered springs that had gone quiet during a drought, and he listened like their stories were treasure maps. "Water's down there," he told my grandmother, tapping one calloused finger on the kitchen table. "We just gotta talk to the ground the right way." So he bought 50 acres for cheap, land nobody else wanted, and brought in that drill rig. The workers laughed at him. "Old man, there's no way you're gonna hit anything here. You should have bought closer to town. They got real wells there." Granddad just smiled, chewed on a piece of straw, and told them to drill anyway. They went down once, twice, dry as a sermon. My grandmother started looking at him like maybe she'd married the wrong kind of crazy. Money was tight, the truck needed repairs. The drill rig operator said, "One more hole, then I'm gone. I'm not wasting diesel on this rock." "Right here," my grandfather said, pointing to a spot halfway up the valley, not near the creek where most folks would have guessed, but on a little rise where nothing much seemed special except a scraggly cottonwood that refused to die. The operator rolled his eyes, but set the bit. At 80 feet, the dust changed texture. At 90, the cuttings came up damp. At 110, water shot out of that pipe so hard it knocked one of the men flat. They capped it and measured the recharge. It didn't slow, didn't quit. That well pumped clear, cold water, day after day. In a valley everyone had called dry, my grandfather had found a vein that might as well have been gold. He built the first troughs by hand, hauling old bathtubs up from town, welding frames out of scrap metal. My father grew up hearing the roar of the pump and the splash of water into metal, a sound that meant cattle could drink, gardens could grow, dishes could be washed without hauling buckets from a creek full of cow prints. We called it the Walker Well, because nobody else had any claim to it. There was no community then, just our land and a few scattered ranches miles apart, all digging their own holes, some striking something good, some not. That well kept us alive more than once. During the drought of '77, when other folks' pumps ran dry or turned brackish, ours kept going. We rationed, we watched the gauge, we prayed a little, but we never had to tell the cattle there was no water today. As the years went by, more land changed hands. Some of our neighbors sold out and moved closer to town. Some passed on and left kids who didn't want anything to do with busted knuckles and early mornings. Every time a parcel came up for sale near us, they'd stop by our kitchen first. "Sam," they'd say to my dad, "you want to take this off our hands?" If we could afford it, we did. Not because we wanted to own everything, but because we wanted to make sure whoever did own it understood the land, understood the way the wind cut through in winter, the way the creek rose fast in a sudden storm, the way you never took a working well for granted. By the time I was grown, the Walker name was on more than half the valley's deeds. North Pasture, South Slope, the old Kelly field, the scrubby hillside everybody thought useless until my dad seeded it with hardy grass and proved them wrong. And, of course, the little rectangle around the wellhead, a small square on paper that meant survival in practice. My mornings were shaped by that well. I'd wake up before sunrise, pour coffee into a dented metal mug, and step out on the porch while the sky was still deciding whether to be gray or blue. The air would have that sharp edge it gets right before the sun crests the ridge, cold enough to nip at your ears, but full of promise. First chore was always the same: check the flow. I'd walk or drive out to the well, listen for the hum of the pump, watch the water spill into the troughs. In summer, you could hear the cattle long before you saw them, hooves and lowing carrying across the dry ground. In winter, your breath would turn to fog in front of your face while the water steamed slightly in the cold air. When I was younger, my dad would stand beside me, arms folded, eyes on the gauge. "Never forget," he'd say, "this is borrowed. We take care of it, it takes care of us. We abuse it, it'll turn on us. Water remembers." As I got older, the routines became mine: fixing leaks, replacing valves, making sure the electrical box was weatherproof and mouseproof, teaching my own kids how to listen to the sound of a pump and know when something wasn't quite right. For decades, that well was just there, a quiet part of ranch life, reliable, unremarkable, unless you knew what it meant to be without it. Then came the subdivision. One of the last big open pieces of land at the mouth of the valley went up for sale. It wasn't ours. It belonged to a family that had moved away years earlier and rented it out in fits and starts. It was good land, flat enough for houses, close enough to the main highway to tempt people who wanted country living without giving up their commute. A developer from the city bought it. They came with clean trucks, clean boots, and big smiles. "We're going to build something special," their representative told the county commission. "A beautiful, planned community that respects the natural landscape." I watched the hearings, saw the slick brochures with artist renderings of families on porches, kids on bikes, a tiny pond with ducks that probably wouldn't survive the first real winter. I listened when they threw around words like sustainable and eco-friendly and low-impact design. What really caught my attention, though, wasn't the houses. It was the water. At one meeting, a commissioner asked the question I'd been waiting for. He said, "Where are you planning to get your water? That end of the valley doesn't have a lot of wells that produce enough for a subdivision." The developer smiled like he'd rehearsed the answer. "We're in talks with the county and local landowners about a shared solution. There's an existing well in the valley with reliable output. Our engineers believe we can build a community pipeline with minimal disruption." My stomach dropped. I didn't need a map to know which existing well they meant. You don't have reliable output around here unless you're drawing from the same deep source my grandfather found. Sure enough, a week later, I got a polite letter, not from the HOA, which didn't exist yet, but from the County Water Authority. They wanted to talk about a mutually beneficial agreement to expand service from the Walker Well to the Whispering Creek development. At first, I said no. My reasons were simple. That well had never let us down. I didn't like the idea of pushing it harder to water lawns and fill bathtubs in houses that hadn't even been built yet. There's a difference between watering cattle and watering sprinkler systems. But the county came back with data. Their engineers did flow tests. They measured drawdown, recovery rates, long-term sustainability. The report came back saying what we already knew in our bones. This was a strong well, overbuilt for just one ranch, and with capacity to spare if managed correctly. They promised monitoring, they promised caps on maximum draw, they promised that if the well ever showed signs of stress, we'd cut the subdivision off first to protect the ranch. And they offered money. Not a fortune, but a steady lease payment for the easement to run water lines from the wellhead to the development's distribution system, enough to fix some long-ignored equipment, pay off a stubborn loan, and maybe think about replacing the old flatbed with something newer. More than the money, though, was something else, the idea that this well could carry on helping not just us, but a whole community. My grandfather had always said water was meant to be shared, carefully, respectfully, but shared. So I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee, the county lawyer and my own lawyer, and we hammered out an agreement. The key points were simple and very clear on every page. I owned the land around the well. I owned the well structure and equipment. The county had an easement to run a buried pipe from the wellhead to their system, install a meter and valve on a small concrete pad, and access that meter pad for maintenance via a specified ranch road. The subdivision, when built, would receive water through the county's line. If their usage ever threatened the well's stability or interfered with ranch operations, I had the right, through the county, to suspend or terminate the supply until it was resolved. No one, not the county, not any future homeowners association, had any right to alter my fences, gates, or livestock access without my written consent. We signed it, we shook hands, and they buried the pipe, they poured a small pad by the wellhead, and installed a meter box that looked like a metal tombstone sticking out of the ground. On paper, it was still the Walker Well. On the developer's brochures, though, it became the Community Well, one more bullet point on their list of amenities. At first, it seemed harmless. Houses went up, asphalt went down. The sign appeared, Whispering Creek Estates, a deed-restricted community. People moved in with their moving vans and Pinterest dreams. Kids learned to ride bikes in the smooth cul-de-sacs. Sprinklers ticked in neat arcs over small squares of sod. And for a while, that was just life. I'd see their cars drive past my gate, morning and night, tires rolling over the buried pipe that carried my well water to their kitchens and showers. I'd wave if I was nearby. Some waved back. A few stared like they weren't sure if they should be afraid of the man in the dusty hat. My well pump ran a bit more often now, but the gauge stayed in the safe zone. The county sent me quarterly reports, usage, pressure, levels. It all looked fine. The first sign that trouble was brewing didn't come from the county. It came, ironically, from the mail. One Tuesday, I found a glossy newsletter stuffed in my box. Whispering Creek Community News, it proclaimed. There was a note about a block party, a reminder about approved trash can placement, and an article titled, Our Beautiful Community Well. I read it at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold. In the article, the HOA president wrote about how our community well provides fresh water straight from the valley, a unique shared resource that belongs to all of us. She talked about protecting our well area and making sure the land around our water source reflects our high standards. She did not mention me once, not my land, not my family, not the agreement. To read that piece, you'd think the HOA had descended from the clouds and summoned water from the ground by committee vote. I shook my head and set it aside. It was irritating, yes, but it was just words. I've been left out of more than one story in my time. Then came the first formal letter. Dear well-adjoining property owner, it began, a phrase that already rubbed me the wrong way. The board, it said, had serious concerns about livestock and agricultural operations occurring in close proximity to the community well access road. My cattle crossing the pasture to reach the troughs near the well were, according to them, a potential health hazard and a liability issue for the association. They requested that I refrain from allowing livestock in the vicinity of the well access route and suggested that rerouting pasture usage would be in the best interest of all parties. At the bottom, in bold, was a line about failure to comply, possibly leading to legal action to protect the community's water supply. I read that letter 3 times. Then I walked out to the well. The access road they were talking about was nothing more than a dirt lane that had existed long before Whispering Creek. My grandfather had driven that road in his first truck. My father had hauled fence posts along it. I'd taken my kids down it in the bed of the pickup to watch meteor showers. It crossed open pasture because most of my land is pasture. It passed near the well because, well, that's where the well is. There was nothing special about it, no sign, no fence line separating their route from mine. It was just part of the land. I stood there, boots in the dust, and looked at the metal wellhead, the pipes, the meter box. Then I turned slowly and looked back toward the valley's mouth where the subdivision roofs peeked over the slight rise. Well adjoining property owner. Huh? I muttered. The next day I called the number on the letter. A woman answered, with the name of a property management company, one of those outfits that runs HOA affairs for people who don't have the time or patience to do it themselves. Hi, I said. Name's Sam Walker. I got a letter saying my livestock are a hazard to your community well access road. I think there's been some confusion. Oh, she said brightly. Yes, Mr. Walker. You're the property that backs up to our well site, correct? Backs up to it? I repeated. Ma'am, my property doesn't back up to your well site. My property is your well site. That well is on my land. There was a pause. I could practically hear her scrolling through a screen. Well, according to our information, the HOA maintains an access easement there. Our board has a responsibility to protect the well area, so any nearby activity that could— The HOA has no easement there, I said, keeping my voice even. The county water authority does, and their easement lets them maintain their meter and pipe. It does not give you the right to tell my cattle where they can walk on my grass. She shifted to the patronizing tone people use when they think they know more than you. Mr. Walker, I'm not an attorney. I'm just explaining the board's position. They're prepared to pursue enforcement action if necessary. If you'd like to dispute their interpretation, you're welcome to attend a meeting. Maybe I will, I said. In the meantime, don't ever send anyone out to enforce anything on my land without clearing it with me first. That'll save everybody some trouble. I hung up and stared at the receiver for a long moment, feeling that old, slow burn starting in my gut. For a while it was quiet again. I went back to my routines. The well hummed, the cattle drank, the subdivision watered their lawns. Time passed in fence repairs, calf births, busted hoses, sunrises, and sunsets. Then came a month later, the second letter. This one wasn't just from the management company. It was on official HOA letterhead, signature of the board president at the bottom, Carol Hensley, the same name I'd seen on that newsletter article. Dear Mr. Walker, it began. It informed me that the board had voted unanimously to designate the road running from County Route 18 to the well site as an HOA-controlled access way for health and safety purposes. It claimed this was implicitly supported by their agreement with the county. It then stated that for the protection of the community's water supply, no livestock or non-HOA vehicles would be permitted to use that road beyond a certain point. We expect your full cooperation with these reasonable measures, it concluded. Failure to comply may result in legal action and a request for injunctive relief. I showed that letter to my dog, Rusty, while he lay on the porch with his head on his paws. Reasonable measures, I said. Hear that, boy? They think they're being reasonable. Rusty sighed and thumped his tail once, which I took to mean he shared my opinion. The next Tuesday, I went to their meeting. The HOA board met in the same multi-purpose room by the subdivision entrance that we'd used once for a livestock vaccination clinic back when the houses went up. It looked different now. They'd put a logo on the wall, hung framed pictures of the creek trail, and lined up folding chairs in neat rows facing a long table at the front. The room was full of people. Some I recognized from seeing their cars roll past my gate. Some were strangers. They wore polo shirts, yoga pants, work badges on lanyards. A few kids sat cross-legged near the back, flicking through phones. At the front table sat 5 board members, with Carol in the middle. She had on a blazer and a necklace that looked expensive in a delicate way. A binder sat open in front of her, pages covered with color-coded tabs. When the public comments portion came up, I stood. Name? Carol asked, looking at a sign-up sheet. Sam Walker, I said. I'm the one you've been writing letters to about your community well. There was a rustle in the room. Someone murmured, "That's the ranch guy." Carol pasted on a strained smile. Mr. Walker, she said, thank you for coming. We've been hoping to discuss some concerns with you. Good, I said, because I've got a few of my own.
I walked to the front and turned slightly so I could see both the board and the room. "You all get water when you turn your taps," I said. "You wash dishes, do laundry, water your grass. You talk about your community well like it's part of your clubhouse and playground." A few people shifted, looking uncomfortable without quite knowing why. "That water doesn't come from a magical HOA fountain. It comes from a well my grandfather drilled when nobody wanted this valley. It sits on a piece of land my family owns. The pipe that carries water to your homes runs across my pasture because the county and I signed an agreement to make it possible." Carol opened her mouth, but I held up one hand. "I've read your letters," I said. "You're upset that my cattle cross the same ground your maintenance truck does. You're worried about how it looks, what it means for liability. You've decided on your own that you can declare my ranch road an HOA access way and tell me who and what can walk on it." "This is about health and safety," Carol said quickly. "We have a duty to protect our residents' water. Having animals in such close proximity to the well access, the county has a duty to protect the water," I cut in. "And they do. There are standards I have to meet, and I've met them for years before you ever put a street light in this valley. Your duty," I said, letting the word land, "stops at your property lines." A man near the end of the table piped up. "Our lawyer believes the easement gives us implied control over the route," he said. "We're acting within our rights." "Your lawyer is welcome to air that belief in court," I said, "but until a judge tells me otherwise, I'm going to keep using my land to run my ranch the way I always have." Carol's smile thinned. "We're not trying to be antagonistic, Mr. Walker," she said. "We just need to make sure there's no risk of contamination or interference. Having cattle crossing the road, access to the well area. My cattle crossing the road is not contamination. It's called ranching. You moved in next to a working ranch, and now you're shocked there are animals." A hand shot up from the audience. A woman in a patterned blouse stood. "I don't feel safe knowing cows are near where my kids' water comes from. What if something happens? What if they break something? We pay dues for this. Shouldn't we have a say?" "You absolutely should have a say," I said, "in how your HOA manages your common areas, in how your board spends your dues, in whether you want this sign or that paint color. You do not get a say in how I manage my land, or who drinks from my troughs, or where my cattle walk, just because you can see it from your kitchen window." The room buzzed, half in agreement, half in indignation. Carol raised her hands. "This is clearly a complex issue," she said. "Mr. Walker, we appreciate your perspective, but the board has to think about legal liability. We'll continue working with our attorney and the county to make sure the well area is protected. And I'll continue working with my attorney and the county to make sure my property rights are protected, including my right to use my own gates and roads without someone else's lock on them." There was a little silence after that. Then Carol moved on and the meeting slipped back into talk of pool hours and parking enforcement. I left feeling like I had just tried to explain rain to people who thought their lawn sprinklers invented water. For a few weeks, nothing obvious changed. Then, one morning, I drove out toward the well and noticed something different. The little turnoff from the main ranch road, the one that curved down toward the wellhead and meter, had a new post stuck near it. On that post, someone had mounted a small metal sign, "HOA Well Access Route, No Unauthorized Vehicles." It was planted on my land. Nobody had asked. I stopped the truck, got out, walked up to the sign, and stared at the two screws holding it in place. Then I went back to the truck, grabbed a wrench, and took it down. 2 days later, another sign appeared, bigger this time, on a taller post. I took that one down too. After the third sign, I stopped bothering with the wrench. I just pulled them out and laid them nicely by the meter box with a note taped to the top. Ask me first." Apparently, subtlety was not a language the board spoke. The first lock appeared not on the pasture gate, but on a small side gate I used to drive a truck closer to the wellhead when I needed to work on valves. It was one of those flimsy combination locks with a tag dangling from it. "Do not remove, HOA." I found it on a Saturday morning. I stood there looking at it, then looked at the wellhead, then at the road. I walked back to the truck, pulled a pair of bolt cutters from behind the seat, walked back, and snipped the shank with one clean crunch. The lock dropped into my hand like a dead beetle. I left it on top of the meter box, along with the others, this time without a note. That must have been when the board decided politeness wasn't working and it was time to escalate. The letter that came next was the kind that's meant to scare people. Bold headings, legal citations, references to case law and precedent. It accused me of tampering with community property and interfering with the association's rightful access to a critical utility asset. It said the board was prepared to seek injunctive relief and damages if I continued to obstruct their efforts to secure the well area. They used a lot of big words, but what they were really saying was simple. We don't care that it's your land. We will keep treating it like ours until you make us stop. That was my turning point. Up until then, I'd hoped this was all a big misunderstanding fueled by overzealous volunteers and bad legal advice. I thought maybe I just kept explaining, they'd realize how ridiculous it was to try to regulate a ranch they didn't own. But people who are in love with their own authority rarely back down just because you explain things slowly and clearly. So I did what my father taught me to do when a storm was coming in over the ridge. I battened down and got ready. First stop was my lawyer. Ted had been dealing with land issues out here long enough to have seen every kind of nonsense, from boundary disputes to access fights to some fool thinking he could dam the creek without asking anyone. I laid the new letter on his desk, he read it, then snorted.
"They're getting bold," he said. "They're getting stupid," I corrected. He smiled. "Fortunately, the law doesn't reward stupid when you've got paper on your side." He pulled out our original copies of the well agreement and flipped through. "Here," he said, tapping a paragraph, "this is the key. The county has an easement for a specific purpose. Bring water from this well to that development. It does not grant them or the HOA any control over how you use the land around it, as long as you don't damage their facilities or contaminate the water." He pointed to another section. "And this," he said, "gives you the right to request reduced flow or shut off to the subdivision if their usage or actions interfere with your operations or threaten the well's integrity. They did that to protect your ranch. The HOA probably doesn't even know this clause exists." He leaned back. "Here's what we'll do," he said. "I'll send a letter to the HOA's attorney. I'll include copies of the agreement in a summary of the easement law in this state. I'll inform them, politely but firmly, that their client has no authority to lock anything on your property, post any signage without consent, or attempt to restrict your livestock from areas the county has already approved as compatible with the well." He smiled a little more, the way lawyers do when they're about to enjoy themselves. "And I'll also copy the County Water Authority," he said, "because I have a feeling they'll be very interested to hear that an HOA is trying to dictate terms around a municipal water source they don't control." He did exactly that. A week later, I had a meeting with a county water engineer out by the well. He wore a hard hat and carried a clipboard, but it was a different kind of clipboard, one that came with responsibility instead of ego. "I've been hearing about this from both sides," he said, squinting in the sun. "Wanted to see it myself. We walked the area together. I showed him where the cattle usually crossed, where the HOA had been sticking their signs, where I'd found their first lock. He made notes, took pictures, measured a few distances. From our perspective," he said, "there's no conflict here. Your cattle aren't damaging our infrastructure, the wellhead is secure, the meter is fenced enough. We've approved this arrangement for years without incident. If anything, their attempts to interfere with your ability to manage the land might create more risk, not less."
He pointed to the clause Ted had highlighted. "This is important," he said. "If they keep this up, if they start restricting access in ways that threaten your operations or the safety of your animals, we're obligated to step in. Worst case, if there's an unresolved dispute over the easement, we'd have to shut down this line until it's sorted out." "Shut down?" I repeated. "Temporarily," he said. "But yes, if we can't guarantee the integrity of the arrangement, we can't keep pumping. The subdivision would have to go on restrictions or get hauled water until things are resolved." I imagined the HOA explaining that to a few hundred angry homeowners who suddenly couldn't flush their toilets. "Do they know that?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "They will," he said. After that, my position was simple. I wasn't going to threaten anyone. I wasn't going to puff my chest and say, "I'll turn off your water." I didn't want their kids going without baths or their elderly having to haul jugs, but I was done acting like I was at the mercy of their fines and letters. The truth was, they were a lot more dependent on me, on my land, on my well, than I would ever be on them. All I had to do was stand my ground and let their own overreach push them toward the consequences built into the agreement they'd benefited from without ever bothering to read. Ted sent his letter. The county sent theirs. The ball was in the HOA's court. Apparently, they decided their best response was to pretend nothing had changed, which brings us back to the lock on my pasture gate. The morning I found it, the sky was clear, the air already warm enough to promise a hot day. I'd done my usual porch coffee, scratched Rusty behind the ears, and climbed into the truck to go open the lower gate so the cattle could move to the far pasture for the day. That pasture was where the best grass was at that time of year, and it was also where the big troughs were, fed by a pipe from the well. Most days, the herd knew the routine. When they saw me heading toward the gate, they'd start drifting that way, tails flicking, calves skipping on two long legs. I drove down the lane, dust rising behind me, and saw the cattle bunched up at the gate instead of stretching toward the far fence like they usually would do. Their heads were over the top rail, ears flicking, eyes on me in that expectant way. Then I saw the chain. It was wrapped around the thick metal post and gate panel, threaded through in a way that made it impossible to open without cutting it. The padlock was new, shiny, brass. A plastic tag hung from it, swinging when the cattle bumped the gate. I stepped out of the truck and walked up slowly, jaw tightening with each step. The tag read, "HOA access only. Do not remove." Above it, the white sign with black letters flapped in the breeze. "HOA well access road. No unauthorized livestock past this point." Unauthorized livestock on my ranch. For a minute, I just stood there with my hand on the metal, feeling the vibration every time a cow nudged it or tossed her head. My cattle weren't panicking yet, they had shade, and there was still some water in the nearer trough. But the troughs I needed to get them to were on the other side of this gate. This wasn't a theoretical dispute anymore. This was my animals' access to water being blocked by people who watered lawns with my well and called it community spirit. A car pulled up. Not just any car, the white SUV with the HOA logo, the one I'd come to associate with trouble by sight alone. The window rolled down and the woman in sunglasses addressed me like she'd cut a kid leaving fingerprints on a display case. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I'm glad you're here. We were actually going to try to catch you later today." "Congratulations," I said. "You saved yourself a trip." "We had no choice but to secure this gate," she said. "The board voted last week. The route from the county road to the well site is officially designated as an HOA access road now. We can't have cattle interfering with maintenance or potentially contaminating the area." "That gate," I said slowly, "has been in that spot longer than your subdivision had a name. My cattle have been walking through it to reach water from this well since before you ever laid your first pipe." She smiled that tight, professional smile. "Mr. Walker, I understand this is an adjustment," she said. "But the well serves hundreds of families now. It's bigger than just this ranch." I stepped closer to the gate so my reflection showed in her sunglasses, hat brim cutting a shadow across my face. "You're right," I said. "It is bigger than this ranch. It's bigger than your HOA, too, which is why I made an agreement with the county, not with you." She shifted slightly. "We're simply enforcing reasonable protections," she said. "You can move your cattle to another area. We're asking for your cooperation. If you cut that chain, the board will have no choice but to pursue legal action." I looked at the lock. I looked at the cattle. I looked at her. "You're sure," I asked, "that this is the hill your board wants to die on? A lock on a gate you don't own, blocking access to a well you don't own, on land you don't own, after being told by both me and the county to stay off?" Her jaw tightened. "The board has decided. If you have an issue, you can take it up at the next meeting." "I'll take it up with someone else," I said. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled to a number I'd been given after the last meeting at Ted's office. "County Sheriff's Office," came the voice on the other end. "This is Sam Walker," I said. "We talked a while back about HOA people locking things on my property. They've now chained my pasture gate and are blocking my cattle from reaching water fed by the county well line. I'd like a deputy to come out and sort out who's allowed to put locks where." "On our way," the dispatcher said. The HOA woman's eyebrows crept above her sunglasses. "There's no need to escalate this, Mr. Walker," she said quickly. "We can discuss this civilly." "I've been civil," I said. "Letters, meetings, phone calls, signs left neatly by the meter box. You escalated when you put a chain on my gate." We waited there in the heat. The cattle huffed and shifted. A calf bawled. Sweat trickled down my back beneath my shirt. The HOA woman checked her watch, then her phone, then the road. 10 minutes later, a dust cloud announced the arrival of a county SUV. It pulled in beside the white HOA vehicle, and Deputy Harris climbed out, hat shading his eyes, notebook in hand. He nodded at me, then at the woman. "Afternoon," he said. "What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," the HOA woman said quickly, "is that we've had to secure this access gate for the protection of our community well, and Mr. Walker is threatening to cut the chain. Our board has designated this an HOA access road, and we can't have livestock passing near the well area." Harris looked at the lock, the sign, the chain. Then he looked at me. "That about right, Sam?" he asked. "Mostly," I said, "except for the part where she skipped over the fact that this gate is on my parcel. The well is on my parcel. The pipe and meter are under a county easement, not an HOA one. And I've got cattle that need to get through here to reach water their well is helping supply." Harris sighed, the way a man does when he's realized his day just got more complicated than paperwork. "All right," he said, "let's take this one step at a time." He turned to the woman. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation that gives the HOA the right to place locks on this gate?" he asked. She pulled out a folder from the passenger seat and flipped quickly through some papers, hands just a little less steady than before. "We have our covenants. Our governing documents give us authority over all areas affecting the community's shared resources. The road to the well is critical infrastructure. Our attorney—" "I'm not asking about your covenants," Harris said, gently but firmly. "I'm asking if you have anything from the county or from Mr. Walker granting the HOA the right to secure this gate." She hesitated. "Our agreement is with the Water Authority," she said. Right, and that agreement is what exactly?" Before she could answer, a second vehicle pulled up, a white pickup with the County Water Authority logo on the door. The engineer I'd walked the site with climbed out, clipboard in hand, hard hat on the seat beside him. "Deputy," he nodded. "Mr. Walker, ma'am." "Good timing," Harris said. "We're trying to figure out who's allowed to put locks on what out here." The engineer walked up to the gate, looked at the lock, the sign, the cattle, and then at the HOA representative. "You did this?" he asked. "The board authorized it," she said. "We're simply protecting the community's well. We can't allow uncontrolled livestock access near the well," he said, "meets all sanitary standards with the current arrangement. We've inspected it every year. We've never had a problem with the cattle. We have, however, received multiple complaints from Mr. Walker and from our own staff about your association posting signs and locks on property you don't control." He flipped his clipboard open and showed her a page. "This," he said, "is the original easement and well agreement. The county has the right to run a pipe and maintain its equipment. Mr. Walker has the right to continue ranch operations as he always has. Nobody else is mentioned in this document. Do you see the HOA's name anywhere on here?" She scanned it, color rising in her cheeks. "Our attorney said—" she began. "I can't speak to what your attorney said," the engineer cut in. "I can only speak to what's written on this paper and what's in our regulations, and right now what I see is your association interfering with our ability to ensure reliable water service." "Interfering?" she repeated, offended. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "If Mr. Walker's cattle can't reach water, that's a problem. If this dispute escalates to the point that we can't guarantee access to the well site, that's a problem. In the worst case, if this mess affects our legal ability to operate on this parcel, we'd have to shut off the line feeding your subdivision until it's resolved in court." She stared at him, eyes widening behind her sunglasses. "You can't do that," she said. "We absolutely can," he replied, "and we will if we have to. We have to protect the integrity of the supply and the rights of the landowner we made the agreement with. If the HOA wants to be part of that conversation, they should have been at the table 20 years ago when this deal was signed." Harris turned back to her. "Ma'am," he said, "at this moment, you've got a chain hand lock on a gate that belongs to Mr. Walker without his permission. That's not an HOA issue. That's trespass and tampering with someone else's property. I'm going to ask you, politely, to remove that lock." She looked at me, at the deputy, at the engineer, and at the restless line of cattle. "The board will hear about this," she said tightly. "I'm counting on it," I said. She didn't move. "Ma'am," Harris said, a bit more firmly, "I can either watch you remove that lock, or I can remove it myself and file a report. Your choice." Her jaw worked. Slowly, she reached into the SUV, pulled out a key ring, and stepped out. Her hands shook just enough that I noticed as she unlocked the padlock and unwrapped the chain. The moment the gate swang a few inches, the cattle surged forward, noses pushing, hooves clattering. I stepped in, put a hand on the nearest cow's shoulder, and eased the gate open just enough to let them start filing through, one by one, toward the far troughs. As they moved, dust rising around us, I looked at the HOA woman. "For future reference, if you've got a problem with how I run my ranch, you bring it to me first, not with locks, not with threats, with a conversation." She didn't answer, just walked back to her SUV and slammed the door a little harder than she meant to. The engineer put his clipboard away. "He'll be sending a formal notice to their board," he said quietly to me, "and copying you and your attorney. If they do anything like this again, we'll treat it as interference with county operations." "Appreciate it," I said. Harris closed his notebook. "You did right calling us," he said. "Better to have this on record than to sort it out after somebody does something dumb in the heat of the moment." He glanced at the SUVs. "Looks like they're already having a come-to-Jesus meeting with themselves," he added dryly. He left, the engineer left, and eventually the HOA SUV drove away too, its logo looking smaller than it had when it arrived. In the weeks that followed, things got very quiet. No more signs popped up by the well road, no more locks appeared on my gates. The letters from the HOA slowed to a trickle, and the ones that did arrive were suddenly full of phrases like "ongoing clarification" and "in consultation with the county" and "without prejudice." One day, Ted called. "Got a fun one in the mail," he said. "Certified letter from the HOA's attorney. You'll like this." He read it to me over the phone. It was dry, full of legalese, but the important part was simple. After review of the easement agreement and consultation with the County Water Authority, our client acknowledges that the Whispering Creek Homeowners Association does not possess any ownership or control rights over the well located on your property or over the gates and fences surrounding it. Any previous communications implying such authority are withdrawn. The association will coordinate any future access needs through the county in accordance with the existing agreement. Translation. Ted said. They've been spanked. Publicly. On paper. I laughed long and hard. I'll frame it, I said. Frame it and put it by the coffee maker, he replied. News got around the subdivision, too. I heard from the young couple who'd once asked if they could take engagement photos by my creek. They stopped by the gate one day while I was working on a hinge. "Hey, Mr. Walker," the husband said, "we heard the board almost got our water shut off." "Not quite that bad," I said, "but they were playing games where they shouldn't. My wife was at the last meeting," he said. "A lot of folks were pretty mad. They didn't like hearing the water guy say we might lose service if the board kept picking fights with you." His wife nodded. Some of them were like, "Why are we even messing with the ranch? We moved here because of the views. Just leave the man alone and be glad we have water." "Smartest thing I've heard in months," I said. A month later, I got one more letter from the HOA. This one was short. No threats, no demands. It thanked me, and stiff, formal language, for maintaining the land surrounding the well in a manner consistent with county standards, and said the board looked forward to a cooperative relationship in the future. I didn't bother framing that one, but I did tuck it in the folder just in case they ever forgot their new tone. Life went back to normal after that, or as normal as life ever gets on a ranch. I still wake up before sunrise. I still step onto the porch and feel the air, listen to the quiet before the day starts making demands. I still drive out to the well, listen for the hum of the pump, watch the water spill into the troughs, and feel a little lighter every time the gauge sits where it should. The subdivision is still there, too. Kids still ride their bikes in circles. Sprinklers still tick across lawns that don't know yet what a real drought feels like. Porch lights still dot the hillside at night like a second set of stars, closer and more fragile. Their people drive past my gate morning and night, over the pipe that carries water from the Walker well to their homes. Some of them wave now. Some slow down a little, look out across the valley like they finally see more than just background. Sometimes, when I'm feeling charitable, I wave back. I don't hate them, I never did. It's not their fault some board members mistook a bit of power for a crown. Most of them just want what everyone wants: a place to sleep, a place to raise their kids, a tap that runs when they turn it. But I will never apologize for drawing a hard line when someone tries to take control of what my family bled for: the land, the water, the things that came long before Whispering Creek Estates was a name on a sign. If there's a lesson in all this, it's simple enough that my grandfather could have fit it on the back of a napkin. Know what you own, know what you've signed, and know when someone else's rules stop at your fence line. The HOA put a lock on my pasture gate thinking they were defending their community well. They saw pipes, meters, and bylaws and thought that made the water theirs. But paper doesn't change rock. Logos don't move property lines. Covenants don't turn my land into their clubhouse